Thank you, Christopher. Morning, everyone. I have the pleasure of kicking off the first panel for today, where we're really looking at the future of transport, what it means for our cities. And I'm going to welcome four fantastic guests to the stage. We have Rod Staples, probably the man behind Andrew, who's delivering the infrastructure boom that we have, in particular our transport connectivity. Amanda Gilmore from Uber, who have definitely played their role in helping us raise the bar when it thinks about disruption and thinking about things differently. Sam McWilliam from WSP, really helping make sure that new innovation and thought is coming into how we deliver. And Ed Steane, who's had many hats, but at the moment and today is helping make sure Liverpool and the city there and its connection to the airport fulfills into the future. So please, welcome them to the stage. Let's say mobility isn't Ed's strength today. So to kick things off, we've just heard from the Minister, there's been an enormous amount done in the last 8 to 9 years. We've had Metro Northwest open, we've got light rails across Sydney, in Newcastle, we have duplication of major highways across the Pacific Highway at Hume, we've had Opal, we've got fleet renewal all over the place, M4's tunnel and more to come. Rod, where are we going to be in 10 years' time? You put out your blueprint, starting to put a vision forward of what the challenges are and the aspirations are. Can you give us a couple of minutes sort of laying out for everyone what 2030 is going to look like for all of us from a transport perspective?
That's a big question, Theo, I'd have to say, because I asked you to think back 10 years to what your life was like and what it's like today, given the changes that happened, not just in transport, but across society generally. It's a bit of a gamble at one level. What I can say, Bud, is we in transport, just as you saw from the Minister as well, are really excited about sort of the combination of growth that's happening in Western Sydney around both the River City as well as the Parkland City that will emerge over the next decade, and the amount of change that is going on globally around transport, technology, service and infrastructure. And that creates a massive opportunity for us to do things differently as we support the development of Western Sydney than perhaps what we've done traditionally in the past. So we're really applying our mind around that. A great strength for us is that we've got a really good framework with Fuse Transport 2056. The three cities model gives us a really good sort of network view of the way we want to develop the cities, support those cities and also the movement between and in and around those cities. But we have focused in on more of a 10-year blueprint recently. And we've got a couple of big aspirations in that. The first one I'd say is from a customer point of view, in 10 years' time, what we want every one of you, particularly in Western Sydney because of the rollout of the new infrastructure and technologies, is to really see journey as a very simple thing, which is provided to you with absolute choice. And you get a spectrum of choice in your hands through whatever the new generation of an iPhone or whatever it may well be. When you leave home, you've got the full spectrum of choice in front of you, to getting an Uber point-to-point type mode, to driving to a station knowing that there's a car parking spot available, getting on a metro train and getting to a destination and getting to the other end. Full suite of choice. Not thinking at all yourself, but providing that choice to you. And if things happen along the way, you get a personalised update on what to do yourself around that. Now, all the ingredients are floating around in the ecosystem for that, but as we build Western Sydney's transport system, we think there's a huge opportunity to move the dial from a customer experience point of view in there. The other big thing that we're really focusing on now, and we've got a couple of examples, I think, is moving from the concept of not doing transport to place, but doing transport for places. So Newcastle, and as we come to bringing into operation the Sydney Light Rail, a real eye-openers for us in transport about us being a part of something bigger, and contributing to a greater good in terms of the feel and look and experience of a city. So when we look at particularly the Parkland City and how that evolves, we really want to think quite thoughtfully about a very different experience for people out there. Underneath all that, a lot of focus in our toolkit around data analytics, new technology emergences, new service offers, whether we buy those services or whether the market turns up with those going forward. You could almost imagine a cycle / micro-mobility network around the Parkland City in the years ahead with lots of choice and separation and safety features that, quite frankly, is almost impossible to retrofit into a city that's got 200 years of history around the harbour and much, much harder to do. So there's an opportunity for Western Sydney to have a transport amenity that we could only dream of in the east.
So talking about simplicity, talking about amenity, Amanda, your organisation has probably leaped society forward in the way that it thinks about how easily it can access transport, how it connects to multi-modes. What's the next disruption you guys are doing? What's 10, 20 years from now look like, and how you're helping change the way Western Sydney accelerates connectivity and opportunity and takes advantage of all the growth that's taking place there?
Yeah, I think I echo a lot about the customer choice is really at the forefront of what we want to be doing in the next 10, 20 years. We know that mass transit is without a doubt the best solution for moving lots of people, but the reality is only 35% of people in Sydney live within walking distance of a transport hub currently. So we need to come up with solutions to get people to and from those transport hubs, and those solutions might evolve over time. You know, micromobility is really making a splash right now, and we see that as being part of the future with electric bikes and scooters. Shared rides is also key to that, but there could be other innovations that spring up over the next 10 to 20 years. So I think what's really important for the development of Western Sydney and other kind of new infrastructure plans is that we build and design for scale, but also build and design for future changes that we can't really anticipate. We've obviously picked Melbourne as our first launch city for Uber Air, our vertical takeoff and landing vehicles, and those might very well be a part of our transport mix within the next 10 to 20 years. So we need to think about what are these new innovations that we can't completely articulate yet, but how do we create scalable and design forward solutions that can quickly integrate them when they come to market?
So Ed, I'm really interested in, we've heard the Minister say just before, we can't just keep doing things the way we used to do them. We've got to think differently, basically because the public purse isn't an endless pot, as many people think, that there's many competing priorities. But equally, consumers don't want to be living in construction zones for the next 20 years as we build these things. So speed becomes important as much as reducing impact on these people. From your perspective as someone who's helping shape a city and help shape the third city of the city CBD, what can we do and what is Council thinking about in its collaborations for how it can make these things happen quicker?
Thanks, Theo. And look, Liverpool Council is very aware of the opportunities presented by the Western Sydney Airport, presented by this incredible infrastructure boom, but also the challenges that delivery of it will present. So we feel at Council that we have a pretty important role of leading a story about how our community would like to see that infrastructure developed, how our community would like to see that infrastructure leveraged. So that's why, for instance, we're working on the 15th Avenue Smart Transit Corridor connecting the airport to the city centre. That's why we've done so much work around Liverpool Hospital to bring that story alive for the community now. There's all these moving parts going on, but you need to sort of lock it down into some tangibles. And I think Rod's point about delivering transport for place is also part of that. I think pretty quickly people will get turned off just by the idea of kit. They want to know how their community is going to transform and that they will be brought along with it. So that's a big part of how Council is injecting itself into these projects, and we'd like to think working collaboratively under the city deal with our fellow councils and other levels of government to present a bit of a cohesive picture of how the city is going to transform. Because inevitably there will be a bit of pain through that process, but you want the community, you want investors to know that the end point makes it worthwhile to kind of go through that middle ground.
So Sam, yeah, I love this city, but never have I met a bunch of people who love to whinge as much as they do until they get what they want, and then they can't stop talking about how great what they've got is. So there's a significant pressure to continually do things quicker and faster here. We've heard the Premier talk a couple of days ago about the fast tracking and streamlining and supercharging of planning processes and the like. Can we, from a technology or a process perspective, get things done quicker without compromising the voice of the community in making sure we deliver what they want?
I think it comes back to connecting that what is now a very broad bunch of customers to a design process that is being pushed faster and faster. I think we'll see a move towards more collaborative contracts, and I think that will help that process. So how do we get everyone that's going to look at what the future of that technology is and look at what the future of that design is into the same room at the same table as early as possible in the process? And how do we start learning from the breadth of business and the breadth of the customers that we'll be servicing as early as we can in that design process? And I think that's what will keep up with the pace that we require at the moment.
Rod, can we get over the analysis paralysis that we seem to go through to be able to make that happen quicker and meaningfully?
Oh, I think part of the answer to that, because Sam makes a really good point about the community involvement, and I certainly find on the large linear infrastructure projects, rush into the final solution in detail at your peril, because you actually find people feeling like they haven't had their say. I think, as an example, on Metro West, as we've gone into the concept stage of that, we started that conversation on Metro West with those communities 2 to 3 years ago. Really went out and had a whole series of engagement sessions, had this online tool where anyone could go and drop a location where they thought a station should be, put a little comment around it, and really get a live conversation going across community. So by the time this year we've stood up and started talking about station locations, in a geographic sense, it's been heavily informed. So for us, there's an onus on that early work and early thinking and the earlier engagement to influence on some of the big macro decisions, which then actually helps speed up the back-end planning process and makes that more of a streamlined process, but also making sure that you keep going with that conversation right through, because communities will go from the macro, but they will get down to the colour of the paver in the street that you're putting down, and importantly they should, because they're going to be living and working in those areas.
So making great places. We've heard a lot over the last couple of years about autonomous vehicles. We hear about transport on demand. We hear about the decentralisation of the transport network as it expands. Yet a key part of the blueprint and the success of this state has been the transformative role that transport plays around hubs. Do we risk these new technologies moving us away from hubs and centres that have historically been the economic backbones? Or are they always going to be there and it's other behaviours that are going to have to adapt?
I can weigh in on this. I think they're always going to be there. I think the way at least we see it at Uber is that you need to provide users with a platform to make those informed decisions about how they're going to have that end-to-end journey, but really that end-to-end journey should be centered around those transport hubs, and then finding the most efficient mode, whether it be a shared vehicle or an electric scooter or walking, to get to and from those hubs. And to Rod's point earlier, creating that kind of seamless journey where you don't even have to really think too hard about it. And if you get a disruption, you're served with kind of the next best option. And then ultimately being able to pay for that journey end to end. I think providing customers with that choice and that visibility will encourage them to make the right transport decisions. And then we can also test and learn and play with different modes to see how do we get people most efficiently to and from those hubs.
I think we'll see a change in what those hubs are, won't we? So that they'll start being community centres and sort of focus on solving a loneliness problem and community areas rather than just a transport hub.
Yeah, and I think actually maybe almost the reverse. I think these technologies give us an opportunity to actually really bring these hubs to life, because in Western Sydney we have this sort of dual challenge of there's this immense opportunity that the greenfields presents, but we also have this historical sort of underinvestment in transport infrastructure and the challenge of servicing outer urban low density suburbs. And that's where using some of these technologies, whether it's smaller electric buses, whether it's mobility as a service, certainly whether it's innovations through how active transport can be part of the mix, using those to actually create a more powerful hub, and then making sure you have the service to those hubs, and whether it's heavy rail, whether it's electric bus, whether it's trackless tram, whether it's light rail, but actually having that sort of defined solution so someone knows that they'll go to the hub, there'll be that immediate service to take them to their key node, and when they're going home that there'll be a mobility choice that suits their needs, whether they're with their family or whether they're travelling for work, for education. There's a suitable choice that they can easily access. And I think that's part of the design of projects now, and I guess we're inspired a bit by how Metro's been approaching their projects of actually thinking about that whole mobility story. It's not just you're building a piece of linear infrastructure and building some TODs along the way, you're actually trying to build the whole community's mobility outcome.
Theo, I'd probably also add to that, if you look at it through the lens of the customer, the purpose of their trip is becoming more multifaceted. So they don't just go from A to B anymore, they want to do things along the way. And increasingly the experience of the trip is really critical.
Yep.
So when you bring place and sort of economic activity and other things, you bring opportunity to support that multi-purpose trip in different things that they want to do, whether it's shopping or some other lifestyle experience along the way. So when you start to look at that as a collective, you actually start to see the upside of really focusing on the place and the transport together going forward. So I don't see it working against it. I think if you keep a really strong focus on what the customer wants, you'll actually increase your focus on that community centre.
Excellent. So we've heard from Ed there about the efforts that council is doing in trying to amplify the need for connectivity down 15th Avenue and the like. And we know that both from the City Deals and Transport's own commitments, putting in a range of rapid connections between Campbelltown and Penrith and others to what will be the future Western Sydney Airport. Can you give us a bit of an update, Rod, on where thinking and planning is for the layering of those different solutions to be able to connect Western Sydney to what will be its economic future?
And look, that's still a work in progress, no doubt, but the key one has been to get the backbone sort of trunk corridors identified, which we have done through a corridors process over the last few years, and progressively we'll move into sort of gazettal of corridors in those spaces, whether it be the Metro North-South corridor, or some of the motorways corridors, some of the transit corridors, some of the freight rail corridors as well. They're the really spine aspects of the network, but even in some of those, while we'll identify the land, I wouldn't absolutely fixate in that this will be a 6-lane motorway in the future. We might find as technology emerges that we'll utilise that corridor in a slightly different way to originally imagined. Where we see the massive opportunity below those trunk corridors across bus, rail and so forth is in that smaller scale transit system, and rather than just going with a traditional overlay of, say, a bus network and then local road network, is to sort of try and reimagine how the communities could be connected there with much more choice. So all the experimentation we're doing both within Sydney and regionally on demand, on automated vehicles and those sorts of things are going to feed into us wanting to try very different approaches, which ultimately for customer is more choice, more convenience. I think to the point we heard before around people not living close to big transit hubs, we want that to actually not be a disadvantage, because they've got so many sort of those smaller scale trip choices to be able to access that hub without too much cost or inconvenience.
Okay. Sam, we heard the Minister talk quite bullishly before about needing to electrify the whole bus network and to be able to move away from, let's call it older technologies, albeit that they're mainstream today. What infrastructure or what systems or what do we need to have in place to make something like that happen?
Not a bus expert, definitely right.
No, that's all right.
I think we'll see a lot of changes in transport technology to reflect some of those big trends, won't we? So we know that it's going to be hotter, we know it's going to be drier, we know there'll be more extreme weather events. So building that knowledge, I suppose, into the design process now is very important. I think technology will play a large part into it. I don't think we've got all of the answers now, but I think it's being aware of those trends and building them into our design process now, with the flexibility to build and change what we're designing as we go will be very important. Recognising and acknowledging those mega trends today, knowing that we'll have to deal with them in the future, particularly in areas like Western Sydney where we know they will be very prominent.
Yeah, I'm struck by the Minister's comment about what he saw in Europe, because it absolutely resonates with the research we've been doing around what modes might exist on 15th Avenue. The biggest, clearest trend we saw was this progression to zero emissions. And I do say progression because that was part of the feedback we got from transport operators around the world, was this needs to be done in a sustained, gradual way. There's a lot of things, the Minister mentioned some of those around changing the depots, but also the staff, the engineering works, the suppliers, that whole supply chain for electric buses. But I guess we were interested because we wanted to ask the question, well, when the airport opens in 2026, what will the transport network look like? And the clearest message we got was that it will be a zero emissions fleet, most likely that someone in London or someone from Auckland or wherever is flying into Western Sydney from, so that will be their expectation. We also think that zero emissions is quite exciting because of, in addition to the air pollution issues the Minister mentioned, also the perception of the service. Historically, people haven't wanted to live right by a bus route because of the noise, because of the emissions, because of the general perception. And my office is right next to a bus route, so I can definitely have some sympathy for that. The shift to zero emissions, what we're hearing from networks where they are zero emissions or they have zero emissions routes, is suddenly people want to be right on those routes. Suddenly you want to have a cafe next to a bus stop because of the people movement. You're not worried about the noise or the smell. So that's something we're really excited by for 15th Avenue, is how we can use a zero emissions fleet and how we can plan in that will be the case in 2026. But I recognise the challenge that Rod has of how you do that transition.
Look, we're very excited about the opportunity of moving in the direction the Minister was talking about. I probably won't add more to that because I think we've heard enough. The other thing I'd say, but it's not just about electric fleet, it's also about a more modern, safer vehicle. So, one of the biggest issues we have with is collisions between pedestrians and buses. In fact, there is some potential to amplify that with quieter buses, as you were just referring to. So what you need to be looking at with the next generation of buses is not just electric, but what safety features are we getting to protect people around those buses as well as people inside those buses. And there's lots of great technologies coming through, so we're excited about bringing that at the same time.
So is there an opportunity, being selfishly looking after Western Sydney's interests here? The Premier has talked about the Airtropolis being a real centre of advanced manufacturing, if not the leading centre in Australia. Is there an opportunity now for transport and industry to just start committing to a centre or something around the development of the skills and the technologies to make that happen and make Western Sydney the bedrock of how those solutions are going to roll through the rest of the city?
I'd say absolutely there's an opportunity. The thing that gives me a lot of confidence is that having worked inside the government sector for about 10 years, we're more joined up in terms of looking at Western Sydney both at a Commonwealth, state and local level than I've ever seen before. And I think extraordinary acknowledgement of all parts of government that are working in that space. But even within New South Wales, the cross-cluster engagement, and we see Western Sydney Airport through the lens of economic development and sort of social outcomes for Western Sydney and transport supporting that. So if there's economic opportunities for manufacturing in that area, then obviously we'll get in and support that.
Yeah.
And we see it as a bit of a safe space, actually, for all levels of government because, Liverpool is unashamedly a growth council and we're excited for the growth that comes. We need to do it in a way, to the first question, that, responds to our existing community's needs and improves their lot. That's a critical part of this. But we also have a lot of growth coming in and we're welcoming that growth. And I know the surrounding councils have a similar sort of mindset. So for government to sort of test out ideas, for government to introduce new technologies, we actually see this as a sort of a safe place to do that. And would like it almost to be a bit of a sandbox, I guess, for innovation. And ideas that then can obviously be migrated to other parts of the city and the state.
So from a customer perspective, Amanda, we've talked about choice and how important it is, and very much how Uber and other ride-sharing technologies or services have been opening that up and disrupting things. Uber Pool's been something that's been brought in. What's Sydney's take-up like? What's Western Sydney's take-up like? Is it something that's been embraced as much as you'd hope? And what's its future look like, or the progressions beyond that in terms of its new incarnations?
Yeah, Sydney and Melbourne both alike have completely embraced Uber Pool as a product. This is when it's multiple people going in the same direction and our technology matches them together and offers them a ride at a cheaper price. And I think we've seen amazing uptake. I mean, there's a lot of density of demand, which makes Uber Pool work really well in a place like Sydney. You have lots of people who are moving in the same direction at the same time. We've also been exploring moving it into slightly smaller cities, like Perth, and we launched there about 6 months ago and are also seeing kind of this great efficiency that's really unparalleled actually in relation to how Uber Pool works around the world. So I think for us, this is the beginning of kind of that on-demand public transport journey and matching people who might not be along a bus route or near a transport hub or a train hub in a smaller vehicle. So kind of right-sizing the right vehicle size for the need. And so right now you can get matched with up to 3 people, but I think in the future we see that expanding to more minibus size and that becoming an option that is a very viable and relevant part of the total transport mix, and is best suited in areas where it might not be efficient or the right most effective cost solution to fully run a bus or a train.
Rod?
Both within New South Wales and I think some of the more progressive jurisdictions around the world, you're seeing this attack it in different directions. So you've got the Uber pool type model, and then you've got us trying the on-demand type bus, which is actually trying to do a very similar thing from a customer outcome point of view, although there are some differentiators there. I don't think there's any doubt this is what the customer wants. I think that there's some more evolution about the business models that are available, market-based versus service provided by government type things to be further tested out and everything, but it's a bit of a no-brainer that those types of services will succeed.
So on that note, to all of you, but I'll start with Rod, what does the consumer want? Or what's the consumer in 10 years going to want that they don't know they want today?
Well, certainly I've got 3 kids and I already have conversation about the way they think versus the way perhaps I did when I was a kid, and it's quite phenomenally different. To me, it'll be very much about personalised service, but complex public network. So you want to feel like you're being treated as though your trip is important and personalised to you, but given the convenience to navigate something that is available to many. And I'm absolutely certain that the customers want that personalised service and absolutely tailored to them. So bringing the infrastructure, the service provision, the market-based things like the Ubers together with the technology and the data, we will be able to create that without any doubt. And I think customers will really enjoy it. That's on the customer side. We haven't talked much about freight.
Yep.
I think in the freight world, there's opportunity for that as well, particularly in the sort of small-scale delivery side of things, to actually bring similar thinking and technology there, which will actually make it easier to get goods around in a more efficient and lower congestion sort of model as well.
Amanda, are Uber going to be moving into the freight market at any point in time soon?
We actually are, yeah. We have a freight business that is running in the US and parts of Europe right now, and it's a very kind of similar problem that we're tackling as we did with Uber, where you just have older industries that haven't been really embraced technology yet. So it's connecting those people that need the freight services with the people providing it in a much more seamless and integrated way. So it's a really interesting space for us to delve into.
Ed, are you concerned from a Liverpool perspective that the progression of online sale and hence to home deliveries, that an airport that's going to have major freight activity going through it, in and out of it, etc., that your city will be choked with delivery trucks and that it'll be an unpleasant place for people to live?
Well, I think actually, again, kind of the opposite. Obviously, we're the home of Amazon in Sydney, which we're very excited by. So on that metric alone, online sales and the boosting of that business and their associated suppliers is very exciting for us. I guess we want to optimise the road network. We want to get the uses that need to be on the road efficiently and reliably, and then those that can be shifted to other modes done so. So I think that's more where we see the solution. As I mentioned at the start, there's this unprecedented investment with the number of motorways that are going in, the upgrades to those local roads and state roads as well. So I think what we're looking at right now is how we can focus the use of those roads on the most economically efficient outcomes, rather than just having induced demand of private motor vehicle use. We want to have someone who's commuting to have an option other than driving their car.
Rod, when Uber came in, there was a significant movement in the force, shall we say. There were people who criticised that they were not having to live up to the same regulatory standards as other things. New technologies, AI, autonomous, start to challenge the way we've done things historically, because we're giving over control to robots or algorithms that have been written by flawed people sometimes. Are our regulatory systems ready for the future? And if not, what are the absolute priorities we need to get moving on to ensure that what we talk about in terms of future transport can actually be delivered?
Look, I think we learn a lot out of the point-to-point process, and our sense would be that we think we've actually made a really good step forward. We would have started earlier if we had our time again in addressing that, and by no means I think we've completely got it right, but there's still reviews going on to sort of fine-tune all of that, but the strategic direction is right. Our sense now is we've really got to start experimenting a little bit more with what's going on and then look to actually get ahead of the game on regulatory type things. I think it is looking at where there's more market-based services coming in and how we actually balance the aspirations of those commercial organisations with the sort of thing that Ed was just talking about in terms of access to network and the efficiency around that, but first and foremost the safety. I think the role that government will need to continue to make sure they do, even if they take their hands off some of the service provision, is that they can give a level of assurance to community that they're operating within a safe environment. So a really fresh look at the overall sort of safety assurance across the transport network as things potentially move more into a market-based approach is a focus for us.
So I'm going to throw probably one of the last questions to Ed and Amanda, and then to Ed and Sam, and work our way back. This week the Premier's talked about, as I said, supercharging planning. And one of the things that many developers and proponents across Western Sydney often lament is the delays that happen in the process around planning, and often a finger's pointed at RMS or transport in that regard, fairly or unfairly. What needs to happen, though, from a multi-agency perspective, and in your regards, Transport Rod, for that movement of planning and DAs and activity and activation on the ground to actually meaningfully happen quicker and not just be a motherhood statement?
Yeah, well, I think the Planning Partnership Office is a useful precedent that we can sort of draw on. The Planning Partnership Office is drawing together 8 city deal councils along with Blacktown to work together on key planning issues, and then they blend in with relevant state government agencies. And in particular, they've been working on understanding the planning regime that's going to operate around the Aerotropolis. So that's a mechanism that, at least on my project, we look at and saying that's great that they're at the sort of front end strategically, but as they give effect to, that sort of gives us an idea. And I think, from council's perspective at least, we've been really excited with how well that works. And I guess playing to the strengths of different levels of government as well. State government have the depth of expertise, they have that institutional knowledge. Local government has the understanding of community, and federal government has that vision across other states, across other cities, to learn from the best of what's happening on. And also they have a funding capacity as well, which is quite nice. So bringing those three together in a structure like the Planning Partnership Office, we think is quite useful. But I think that's going to be the challenge. It's perhaps easier to do that at a strategic level than it is at a statutory planning level. But I think we should try and do that using a mechanism like the Partnership Office.
Sam?
For us, it's the really solid sharing of data and a really solid backbone of that data sharing between government agencies. And we've seen big advances in that since when we started North West Rod to where we are now on Metro West and Greater West. But that ability for intergovernment agencies not to pay for the same data twice and make sure it's shared amongst all of the players in the room.
Rod, final word? Oh, Amanda, did you want to say something?
No. Well, I'd say that I want to say a few things on this one. She got me going in my brain on this one. The first thing I'd say is that, yep, we do slow things down sometimes. What I'd say in the main, when I often get dragged into these things for a conversation, it's with the best of intentions on our side around trying to protect the network, make sure that once the development's gone in, that in fact the road network, the rail network, whatever, is still functioning. So it's not a case of deliberately wanting to slow or stop things, but I think trying to balance. But we have grappled with that, particularly with the development side of the industry engaging with an RMS, the trains, different parts of transport. So we've actually, over the course of this year, we started flipping ourselves upside down, not just for this type of thing, but also for customer, to think much more about people in our organisation being focused on a place and all things in a place, and representing transport and all modes of transport in that place. So you'll have heard about us bringing RMS and Transport for New South Wales together. Underneath that, Sydney Trains and others still exist, but we are now moving to a larger number of our organisation being focused on not just running a network, but servicing a place with all the transport. What that will help us to do is engage with industry and developers in a more holistic way about solving problems and getting in with earlier engagements to sort of proactively balance off that transport need with the development imperative and the timing.
Everyone, I don't know about you, but I'm excited for the future. Maybe it's because I've got 3 young kids and they're not giving me a choice on that matter, but I feel visions are in hand. We have an amazing captain at the head of the ship steering us in the right direction, and an industry and a community that's sharing a voice and a vision moving forward. Please thank our panellists.